So now that we have two categorical variables, we're going to look at more specific definitions of two different types of variables. We have what's called a response variable and what's called an explanatory variable. So we need to be able to figure out which one is which once we have two variables. So the response variable is also sometimes referred to as the dependent variable. And what it is our outcome of interest. Or in a sense, what I really would like to know, the main goal. Once I know that, I can figure out my explanatory variable, or also sometimes referred to as the independent variable. And just as the name explanatory variable says, it is thought to partially explain the response variable. So we're going to look at this in reference to our example that we looked at in the first video from Module 5. The two variables that we had were the feelings about the president, and then also if they voted for Trump or not. If I go back and look at the problem more specifically, I can really see what my goal or my response variable is. We are interested in seeing how the president's approval rating looks among U.S. adults. So I really care most about if they approve of the president or not. So that is going to be our response variable. Now, what we might think can explain their feelings about the president is if they voted for Trump or not. So that is going to be our response and our explanatory variable for our example. I mentioned we were going to look at what's called a contingency table. That's what we have here next. It's just a nice way to summarize two categorical variables. Generally, the explanatory variable is the row variable. So by that I mean we defined our explanatory variable was if they voted for Trump or not. So this is no, they did not vote for Trump. This is yes, they did vote for Trump. So each row is going to be part of my explanatory variable. And the response variable is my column. So I have their feelings about the president, if they disapproved, were neutral, or approved. The other things on here are just totals, but we're going to talk now more specifically about what these numbers represent. So I've chosen a few numbers down here, but then ones that are similar to it would have similar representations. So if I look at the 987, that's going to tell me that there was 987 people who did not vote for Trump and disapproved of him. So these ones did not vote for Trump because they're in that no row. And since they're in the disapprove column, they also disapproved of him, of the president. All right, next, if I look at my 950, first to notice that's actually in a total value. More specifically, it's the total of those that approved. So there was a total of 950 people that approved. Next, my 1,139 is a total, but it's of my yes row. there was a total of 1,139 people who did vote for Trump. And then finally, the 2,500 is my total of my totals. So that's just my total sample size. So that's going to be our N. Right, now these numbers that you see in this table should not seem too surprising. Let's actually first look at this last row that we have here. So of our total of 2,500 people that we sampled, 1,400 disapproved, 150 were neutral, and 950 approved. Well, where did we see that? Well, if I go back to my StatCrunch, this was our pie chart that we created just based upon how their feelings about the president. So this is where I see my 950 approved, 1,400 disapproved, and 150 were neutral. Where I saw that in the actual note handout was on the very first page. This initial pie chart that we had those exact same numbers on it. So let me label that. This last row was our initial pie chart that we had on page 1. All right, so for these other numbers, this 987, the 76, the 298, the 1361, these we saw as well. More specifically, we saw those when we had the 2 different pie charts. So here's those that did not vote for Trump. Okay, did not vote for Trump. We had the 987 disapprove, 76 being neutral, and the 298 approving. So these are my same numbers that I see in my first row. The 1361 was what we got when we added up those 3 numbers. Very similar to the yes row, our numbers are over here. 413 disapproved, 74 were neutral, and 652 approved. And if I add up all those numbers, I get our 1,139 that we see here. So these 2 rows, we see in our pie charts when we had 2 separate ones. So when they were broke up based upon voting for Trump. So these numbers are not really new. It's just a quick way of summarizing all 3 pie charts really in one table. All right, so I mentioned in our first video for Module 5 that one of our goals was to see if there was a relationship between our variables, or more specifically how we said that there is, did we think that voting for Trump had an impact on the person's current approval of the president? That's what I mean by a relationship between them. So for our example, how would I actually write that out more specifically here in terms of response variable versus explanatory variable? So do the feelings about the president which is our response variable, appear to be different based on if they voted for Trump. And that voting for Trump was our explanatory variable. So how can we look at that more specifically? Well, let's start by looking at a way to summarize those data that we had. So in a sense, the counts that we had are sometimes hard to look at to really see what's going on. So another way to look at it is what's called row proportions, or a lot of times referred to as row percentages. And what that means is that each row will add up to 100% or 1 if you're doing the decimal form of them. So what we're going to do is focus on one row at a time. So first, I'm going to focus on my no row. And all the numbers that I'm going to be using are going to be coming from this contingency table that we have. So notice I'm just going to focus on my no row. So really what I care about is I'm just going to focus on our 1,361 people that did not vote for Trump. I'm going to ignore the others for now. So of those that did not vote for Trump, I want to figure out what percent disapproved of him. So how could I find that percentage? Well, I'm going to take my 987 that disapproved, divided by how many did not vote for Trump. So just this 1,361 number. So for my no row, for those that disapproved, we're going to take the 987 divided by the 1,361. Decimal-wise, that's going to give us 0.7252. Or when I put that in my table, I'm going to make it a percentage. So I'm going to multiply by 100% or move my decimal 2 places to the right here to get 72.52%. Next, I'm still going to focus on those that did not vote for Trump, but now I want to figure out what percent were neutral when it came to their feelings about the president. So to do that, we're going to use our 76 that were neutral, but again, we are just looking at those that did not vote for Trump, so I'm going to divide by the 1,361. And when I do so, we are going to get 0.0558. Again, moving the decimal 2 places to the right will give me 5.58%. In a similar fashion, we'll find our approve percentage by taking the 298 divided by the 1,361. And that gets me 0.2190. We're making that a percentage, 21.90%. Now notice if you add up these 3 numbers, that you will get 100%. So that's why it's called a row percent, because the row is going to add up to 100%. Now when you see up here that it said it should sum to 1, what that means is these decimal numbers before I made them percentages will add up to 1. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for our yes row. And we're going to do it in a very similar way, except for now we are just working with this 1,139 people. So if I want to find out, well, what percent of these 1,139 people that voted for Trump disapprove of him, I'm going to take the 413 divided by the 1,139. So this time it's my yes row, but my disapprove column. We'll take that 413 divided by the 1,139 to get 0.3626. Making that a percentage is 36.26%. To find what percent of those are neutral, we'll take the 74 divided by the 1,139. and we get 6.5%. And then finally, what percent approve? Take the 652 divided by the 1,139. Or that will be 57.24%. Again, adding those numbers up, we do get 100%. Let's go ahead and talk about this last row. Most of the time when I calculate row percentages, these are really the numbers I want. But if I wanted to do them for my last row, an important thing to keep in mind is that this row is still going to add up to 100%. So to find this number here, I'm not going to add down to find it. I want to focus now on everybody. So what we mean by that is we are now working with our total of 2,500 people, and I want to figure out what percent disapproved. So I'm going to take the 1,400 divided by the 2,500. Then I'll take the 150 divided by the 2,500. The 950 divided by the 2,500. And so when I get those numbers, we get 56%, 6%, and 38%. So notice that those numbers will also add up to 100%. Right, so what can we say? So I'm going to interpret my no row as well as my yes row. So of our 1,361 U.S. adults who did not vote for Trump, see, we found that 72.52% disapprove of the president. .58% were neutral. And the rest, or 21.9%, approve of the president. Then we can do a similar thing for our yes row. But this time we're looking at 1,139 U.S. adults. And these did vote for Trump. Here we found that 36.26% disapprove of the president. .5% are neutral. And the rest, which was 57.24%, approve of the president. So those are our interpretations here. Now, how does this compare to what we said when we interpreted the two pie charts in the last video? Well, at this point, it might feel a little bit like deja vu, because if you read these, other than the fact that maybe I have the neutral numbers at the end, the percentages are exactly the same. The number of people I'm talking about are exactly the same. So these are the same. So what that means is when we looked at this contingency table thus far, we haven't really done anything different than what we already did by looking at the pie charts. So this contingency table is a nice way of looking at all of those pie charts at the same time. So these were my percentages from my 2 pie charts that we had there. And that last row, our total percentages that we had there, was that very initial pie chart that we had back way on page 1. So when you're looking at a contingency table, really you could be looking at pie charts to understand it as well. In the next video, we'll talk about how we're really going to test this relationship between our 2 categorical variables.